Welcome to another segment of our mission adventure with Jesus. How's it been going? I hope that you are feeling more comfortable and having more fun all the time. Today, we're going to focus on how to seek, recognize, and respond to what Jesus is already doing in the lives of the people we are enjoying.
Most people I talk with think that seeking and recognizing what Jesus is already doing around them must be the most difficult part of joining Jesus on his mission. After all, wouldn't that require a skill set that's much higher than most Christians have?
Turns out seeking, recognizing, and responding to what Jesus is already doing in the lives of the people around us is really pretty simple.
After all, we're not being asked to seek what isn't happening, but to seek what is happening. We're supposed to simply open our eyes and look. But on the other hand, if we don't seek, we won't find. And that's why, at least at this point, many of us don't really know what Jesus is up to in the lives of people around us. It's not that he is inactive, it's that we are inattentive. But if we will seek, we will find. When Jesus speaks of that in the Gospel of Matthew, the literal Greek translation of that could be rendered, "He who keeps on seeking will find." There's an ongoing verb tense that he uses. He who keeps on seeking will find. In other words, he who seeks as a persistent habit will find. So what Jesus is inviting us into is a persistent habit of seeking, not just an occasional hobby. His promise is very simple. If we will keep on seeking, we will find what God is already showing us.
So how do we keep on seeking, recognizing, and responding to what Jesus is already doing in the lives of the people around us? We pay attention to what he is showing us. Who has he put around us? Where is a little bit of kindness needed, a little bit of grace, a little bit of time needed to make a difference in that person's life? It's really quite simple.
In fact, we experienced this just not too long ago again on a Saturday night. We had been invited kind of in the last minute by some of our neighbors down the street to come down for a shrimp dinner. As we were sitting and enjoying our shrimp dinner together, Jim and I started a conversation in the usual way. "Hey, how you been doing?" and all that. However, it wasn't long before Jim wanted to have a conversation off to the side. In my mind, I started asking, "Jesus, what are you up to here?" Turns out, Jim wanted to talk about the trouble he was having with his job. Ever since the sale of the company about a year ago, things had been getting rough at work, real rough. And as my friend was telling me about the increasing stress he was under, and especially as it was getting systematically worse over these last few weeks, frankly, it wasn't that hard for me to recognize where a little hope and redemption were needed in my friend's life. And I know this, wherever a little hope and redemption is needed in a friend's life, Jesus is up to something. In other words, the kingdom of God was coming near. So, Jim is standing there giving me a pretty good idea of where Jesus is already at work in his life. Jesus wasn't causing Jim's trouble, but he could certainly redeem it. So the question was, how could I join Jesus in what he was already doing here? And it really wasn't that complicated to figure out. All I had to do was keep asking the next question. So I asked Jim, "Is there anybody that can help you get a new job maybe?" And he said, "You know what? It's not that simple, Greg. I can't afford to start over at the bottom of the pay scale." "So what will you do?" I asked. "I don't know, Greg. I'm at a loss." His voice was starting to reflect his growing anxiety. So I asked, "Have you invited God into it?" Silence. No, I haven't," he replied. "Do you think that would help?" "You mean getting God involved?" "Yeah," I said with a smile. "I think that would help." About 30 minutes later, while I was enjoying yet another very tasty shrimp, Jim's wife comes up to me and says, "I don't know what you said to my husband, but he's happier than he's been in a long time." But I hadn't really done anything. It was Jesus who was up to something with Jim. I had just been looking for what Jesus might choose to show me. Jesus did all the hard work. It was Jesus who worked out the precise timing of Jim and me sitting together at an impromptu party eating really good shrimp. And it was only Jesus who could redeem trouble at the job to do something deeper in Jim's life. Jesus was using something difficult in Jim's life to call him back to himself. All I did was point out the obvious. I couldn't make Jim turn to Jesus, but when Jim seemed ready to turn to Jesus, he found the peace and hope that Jesus had been offering him all along. I was just there to help. Simple for me, complex for Jesus. But Jesus handles complexity really, really well.
The story of Jim and the shrimp is an example of what Jesus calls the kingdom of God coming near. In his book, Joining Jesus on His Mission, Greg really takes time to unpack some of the biblical treasures of Jesus' teaching on the kingdom of God. In the end of chapter 8, he sums it up this way. The kingdom of God is God himself and came into the created world through Jesus. When Jesus arrived here, he unleashed the promised season of world redemption. It is happening now. Wherever God is redemptively present and active, his kingdom is at work. We can seek it, recognize it, and join with it.
That's really all I was doing with my friend Jim, just looking for what Jesus might be up to redemptively in his life.
So if we can seek and find God's redemptive activity all around us, what are we looking for? What does it look like?
It looks like wherever we would see a little grace could be applied. You see, whenever we see that a little grace, a little patience, a little love, a little good news, a little truth might make a difference, we can know this. The kingdom of God is breaking in. The kingdom of God has come near. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, because Jesus is on a mission. Redemption is needed. Jesus is near. Redemption is what Jesus does. So we can go throughout our day keeping our eyes and our ears open and asking ourselves this simple question. What's Jesus up to? Where might a little grace be applied?
And we can do this with the strangers we meet every day, and we may never see them again. But what if we regularly did this with the people that God has placed around us in our everyday relational reach?
A great example of this was last July when I was out mowing my lawn. I was ready for a water break. As I was resting, I noticed one of my neighbors walking by on the sidewalk. As she came closer, I could see that she was noticeably upset. I knew this woman. She was one of my neighbors. Something was wrong. It was easy to recognize that the kingdom of God would be nearby. I was there. She was walking by with a lot on her mind. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Only God incidences. She was a little embarrassed to be discovered in her anxiousness. However, God knew how this needed to go. The details are not important. Suffice it to say that she needed someone to ask how she was doing and to be willing to listen. We ended with a prayer on the sidewalk and some hope.
So if we see a need in another human being, especially someone in our neighborhood, we don't have to feel like we need to solve all their problems. But we do need to recognize that the kingdom of God is active and nearby. And that is how Jesus is inviting us to join him, by seeking, recognizing, and responding.
Pretty simple, huh? What's Jesus up to? Where can a little grace be applied?